we wanted to get together today, talk a bit about the cyber insurance industry, how it's affecting kind of end customers, and some key points of understanding you can use to both select the right policy and coverage and get the protection you need in parallel to it to meet those cyber insurance requirements. So, but before we dive into that, my name is Stephen Legg. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Antigen Security. We are a channel first DFIR and managed security services firm that specializes in aligning with insurance carrier requirements, as well as things like the CIS controls, as well as NIST and other kind of common frameworks in regulated markets. Pleased to meet everybody. And Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Stephen. My name is Brian Pilarski. I'm with Willis Towers Watson. Our branding is shortening that to just WTW. We're a specialist in insurance placement, consulting, and other risk financing alternatives for medium to large businesses.
Excellent, and thanks for joining me today. So, just to kind of lay some context and groundwork here, in terms of cyber insurance, what are some of the things that every organization, every kind of decision maker should know about procuring cyber insurance, why it's important? Just give us the kind of 10,000-foot view.
Well, I appreciate that. I think most people, especially the last probably 3 years, now understand the importance of cyber insurance. I think prior to that, understanding the exposure a business had and understanding how it may impact their ability to generate income and revenue and profit, and also the potential liabilities might be associated with a cyber event, attack, or something of that sort. So I think the last 3 years, a lot of awareness has been come to that. So the first thing a business should really think about is what a cyber event could do to them. Meaning, what would the impact to be them to their own first-party assets and their ability as an entity to operate? If they had no email, they had no website, they couldn't take transactions online, how much would that impact revenue? Second is, what if there was a theft of some sort that was perpetrated through some type of cyber attack, crime, bad actor? Could they lose money? Could they be extorted for money? Could they have customers impacted by event that originates from them? And three, what possible liabilities would they have for the data that they do hold? Data of their employees, data of their customers, their intellectual property, things of that sort. So there are three kind of buckets of businesses to think about cyber insurance and how to protect it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And we certainly see that as a digital forensics provider, we see this day in and day out, how much customers that go through this without those coverages wish they would have gone back and purchased them to alleviate those issues, because it can be quite costly and impactful. So kind of building on that a little bit, we've talked in the past, in past content and conversations, and I always appreciate your insight about how to layer cyber insurance with other types of insurance. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we look at cyber insurance as more like a crime event. It really is a way to purport crime and others to induce others to voluntarily give away things that they don't want to give away. So I think one of the most important things in thinking in that context, I think a business owner needs to understand that cyber insurance needs to be layered with crime insurance, because there are aspects where cyber insurance policy will either not cover or have a sublimit of what it will cover for maybe crime or money related events that could occur. So you need to have a robust full crime insurance policy that it interlocks and lines up with your cyber insurance policy to have full protection. A good example would be a pretty common event these days is, invoice manipulation. And so through a hack or through some vulnerability within the network, a bad actor is intercepting invoices with customers, and then they're going right to that customer and inducing them to send them the money or change a bank account that now is the bad actor's bank account. And the cyber insurance policy will fall short on that event. Your crime policies where that would end up being covered for a variety of different reasons for the insurance contract. So the key takeaway to your question, you need to have a cyber insurance policy and a crime insurance policy that have the best protection from what we know as a cyber event or cyber attack or cyber loss.
Understood. And I guess a good question that I think a lot of folks have, because there's lots of people that get a runner or kind of a throw in for either one of those things on either like professional liability or E&O or other types of insurance. Um, what is the, I guess, raw perspective on those kind of throw in policies versus something that's more like a true standalone policy that's layered with other policies that you might be carrying?
Great question, and a great point to bring up. These throw-ins, as they're called, are really kind of a false sense of security. They have a pretty a much bigger name than they really offer in terms of coverage. You'll hear like a cyber defense or a privacy add-on, and we typically see this added to. You mentioned professional liability. They'll add this for privacy related exposure. So a professional liability is you're responsible to a third party. Usually it's money. Oh, by the way, if in an event there's some personal identifiable information that is somehow leaked out from your organization during one of these events, is usually tied to another event. We'll also kind of pick that up too. So it's kind of a throw in, but another trigger has to happen. We see this on property insurance policies where there's they'll give you some like data compromise. If your data was compromised because of a property event, then we'll pay for that. But it's very limited. It's usually a small sublimit. We see these at $25,000 or $50,000 in limits. And Steve, you can speak to this. It's not going to go very far in an event. And two, they're missing the full comprehensive suite that we're talking about. It usually is specific to one coverage line or one thing it will pay for that's tied to whatever else that major policy is offering. So it's one additional bucket for a property policy, is one additional for a liability, but it's by no means comprehensive, and it's usually too little, too late.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times we've come into as a digital forensics firm incident response situations for folks that are compromised and trying to make claims or kind of go down that path, only to find out that their coverage, because it was a throw in on a property policy or something else, or their liability policy, it either the criteria that were defined and then the throw in were not met, so there was no ability to even trigger that sublimit, or the sublimit was so low it didn't even put a dent in the massive cost that comes, especially with things like ransomware, when you're facing both issues of data exfiltration and privacy related legal and compliance issues, as well as dealing with ransom and kind of getting your business back online. Because the unfortunate reality for a lot of folks that really haven't thought about this, or essentially had the conversation at the executive level about what risk cyber events pose to them, and gone back and looked at things like their disaster recovery and business continuity programs, what those outcomes look like, what solutions they're providing, and whether or not they truly have what is called an immutable backup strategy. So that is to say, whether their primary and secondary backups are compromised, did they have tertiary ways of restoring? Are those backup solutions encrypted and protected adequately to where attackers can't take them down? Because it's a really common tactic today, kind of in that industry, and the ransomware as a service industry in general, which is a really kind of stark parallel to what we're seeing on the premium side, and a lot of the changes that carriers are making, which kind of is a good dovetail. Do you want to comment on like kind of what you've seen in the last like 6-12 months in terms of those requirements and how that's affecting those policies and the ability to get or retain coverage?
Yeah, the insurance companies have suffered greatly, just like a lot of businesses have,
Mm-hmm.
and from the events that you're speaking to, and the complex way that they attack a business, they really have a very targeted and complete kind of hold on a business when this happens. So the insurance companies have recognized that there's a lot of vulnerabilities that could cause a lot of money loss for them and therefore the business. So they have, the last 2 years, is there are behavior tools and there needs to be certain protocols from a protection standpoint for the network that must be in place before they will even offer or agree to offer the insurance policy or quote. And the behavior base is multi-factor authentication. It was kind of a nice to have 2-3 years ago. Then it became an absolute requirement. If you do not have MFA, you're most likely not eligible for any cyber insurance quotes. And that's because that's the number one source of whatever iteration of ransomware that comes through, or cyber event or denial of service event, is through these vulnerabilities and networks that are eliminated. I think the statistics are really high. Like, having MFA will reduce the likelihood of a ransomware attack by like 99% or something like that. It's something outrageous. So insurance companies have required this. We're seeing a big push in the last 6 months to be more recent for EDR and MDR solutions as well. So a lot of businesses that don't do any retail online transactions, they don't have any some might not even have a true customer-facing business. They might be serving another purpose as their main business function. We still have seen insurance companies require them implement these solutions, and then some of the solutions that Antigen can provide and offer to them, they're also requiring that. To your point earlier about the backups, the strategy on if there is an event, what type of continuity plans do they have in place? Who are their teams? How is this going to work? If all of that, I consider that more behavioral based and risk management based. If that is not done, the likelihood of having a quote is minimal to none, and the options in terms of price will be much higher than they would be if you had all these tools in place.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that we've brought the Titan Defense Complete offering to market, both for managed service providers, so IT and services companies, as well as kind of end customers, because insurance companies are demanding those things in place, and that's why we're actually certified by several carriers to provide and bind coverage at a much lower rate than traditional policies for those end customers and managed service providers. I don't want to hard sell on the webinar though, but it is why this is a trend we're seeing in the industry though.
But you're fulfilling a very critical role for the business and for the insurance company. It really is a win-win, because the insurance companies they're struggling to find out who is a good risk or not, because they really want to make smart decisions on who they offer insurance to and who they offer the most competitive pricing to. And those risks that maybe don't have all the other protections in place, maybe they should pay a little bit more than the ones that do. So having that product and having it certified, there's a known level of elevated protection and less probability of loss for both sides. So I think it is a great product, and people should be aware of it, because many of my clients and people I talk to are struggling to find out, what can we do to be a better cyber risk, so to speak? How can we better protect the organization, our reputation, our business? How can we protect that? And having solutions like this is a new iteration in the marketplace, and it's much needed.
I could not agree more, but I have a biased opinion, I would say. But you're absolutely right. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, this will be the only way cyber insurance is sold, if I'm honest. So question, kind of stepping back and coming at the challenges from a little bit different angle. Can you give some examples of stories that you've seen or experiences that policyholders have had where their coverage has been challenged, or they weren't able to obtain coverage because of deficiencies in some of those areas?
Yeah, the coverage piece, I think you spoke to it earlier, where people they had a false sense of security, or there was this was kind of a Hail Mary attempt after the event happened. I think the biggest limitation of coverage issues is when we're relying on throw-ins that are really they're very inexpensive for a reason. They don't really offer much, And I think they're really illusionary coverage. So that's been the biggest areas of challenges. Those throw-in coverage really are where most people are disappointed and kind of left out. In terms of the second part of that question is when significant claims, and some of these protocols we've been speaking to, they help. Okay, we're talking about helping apply for coverage and get the best cost for coverage. They also help on the back end of claim management and loss mitigation. People that have these in place have a better experience. They're back up and running faster, and the losses are less. So the ones that don't, again, they pay a little bit more, and their loss experience is tougher because there are just things they haven't thought through, or lessons they haven't learned yet, or just things that are catching them by surprise. And it's really hard to be strategic when there's so much chaos going on. And a lot of chaos goes on the first 24 hours. As you know, this is your business.
Mm-hmm.
This is the need that you serve. Is there's a lot of chaos that first 24 hours of a ransomware event.
Yeah, no, completely agreed. And I think the challenges that everyone wishes they could not face in those circumstances really come down to a lot of the kind of just best practice security hygiene that is aligned with those carrier requirements to begin with. And whether people kind of fudge an answer on the application form, or they didn't know that some areas of the business weren't covered by some of their security controls, or there were gaps. Those things become an issue, as I understand it, with the fulfillment of the claim on the back end. Assuming they do go down that path and engage the carrier and appropriate resources during those kind of heightened circumstances, or an incident/breach. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, that's a newer iteration that, when you do apply for the coverage, there's a questionnaire. We call it an application, and you are really applying, and there's a warranty section that you are warranting that these answers are correct. So we are seeing that more and more, where they're saying they have MFA. They may not fully have it on everything, and that little exception, or not thought through, the insurance companies are denying claims. It could be very frustrating for everyone involved. But to your point about not fudging these or guessing at these, they do have real implications. They become part of the insurance contract, and contract means what do you think it means? They agreed upon these things, and if there's an error in that, or a misstatement, or something's incorrect, it'll void the contract, and the insurance companies can walk away. So it's very important to fill those out intentionally and accurately, because they can have implication on the claim.
And get the help you need when you don't know how to fill some of those gaps. Absolutely,
Right.
completely agreed with that. So like I think last year we saw it with there have been many different iterations of this, and I've heard different stories, but a couple of the big significant ones that I want to call out and kind of get your perspective on, just to see if you've had policyholders that have gone through any of these kind of fire drills. So what we saw last year with folks that we were engaged with, that had cyber coverage, was the carriers actually came back to them kind of mid policy and said, relative to last year in particular, that the family of exchange exploits that came out, proxy shell and the like, carriers were coming out and asking if you had exchange, were you patching adequately? If you can't patch within this time frame, and you answered affirmative to this, we'll terminate your coverage because this is too big of a risk. We saw some similar things this year around Log4j, which kind of dropped towards the end of last year and bled into this year in terms of impact. What kind of situations like that have you seen or helped customers through when they've kind of had to rise to meet some of those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, the landscape's ever changing, and the insurance companies, again, there's a two sides to the coin. They're looking to protect their policyholders, to protect their own bottom line as well, but they're also looking to make sure that they're mitigating risk. And some of these vulnerabilities that come up, these end of life, I think the exchange server you mentioned there, and the end of life things, and the vulnerability that therefore came out, the insurance companies would become aware of this. They would proactively scan the external environment of their policyholders,
Mm.
and they would contact them midterm, so during the contract. And if they did not update or patch these, or take them down or do something, whatever the response, the appropriate response was in that environment, then they told them they would not renew the coverage, and or they would raise their price significantly. I mean, when we're talking 4, 5, 600% increase in price,
Mm.
and these vulnerabilities aren't unique just to this insurance carrier specifically. It's not just their wish list and they want to be better than everyone else. This has now become industry best practices overnight. So if you are non-renewed or you're unable to do that, we've had a lot of businesses that have legacy infrastructure, and there might be a few officers or holdouts or a few different reasons, or customers. There's some business reason that they cannot comply with these things. Not a lot, but more than we'd like to see, have chosen not to buy insurance at renewal because the
Mm.
costs went up and they're not willing to implement these changes. So it greatly increases the risk and vulnerability of that business. And we can see that continuing to happen in the marketplace.
Yeah, that's a really kind of uh, stark contrast in conversation when you consider the fact that even just in the SMB space, 1 in 5 businesses are going to experience a breach every year. I mean, that number has only been rising over time, and for higher risk organizations like financial services, regulated industries, folks that have lots of PII, PHI, folks that have operational technology in place, whether it's manufacturing, energy, or what have you. A lot of those kind of risk circumstances result in greater scrutiny and tighter requirements on the carrier side from what we've kind of seen and experienced on our end with customers that we're helping. Um, the question that I had for you, kind of inside of that, was, um, where do you see this going? Based on kind of how things have evolved, even like the last 18 months, how is this taking shape, and where do you think it's going from here in terms of requirements and how coverage and carriers are approaching the market to help
I agree
policyholders?
with your statement earlier that I think that being engaged with a firm like Antigen and having it was Titan Defense was the name.
Yeah. Titan Defense Complete is our
Complete.
offering that
Yep.
combine insurance coverage.
Yep. I think having that certified as it is by now with you, having that in place, verifiable, is going to be a crucial point for access to insurance.
Mm.
I also think that insurance companies are going to continue to tinker with what is the right pricing model for this, and what they're willing to pay for or not willing to pay for. There's a lot of talk about ransomware participation, and with that meaning the business that buys the insurance might have to share in the loss of ransomware because it's so prevalent and it's the most dollar amount. And so that's something to grapple with. Like, what is the value of that policy then if I have a significant cost? And I also think the preparedness is just as important as the insurance product is. So a lot of people say, okay, we've bought cyber insurance, great, so there's money, but that is the after the fact, multiple days later piece. The immediacy that we talked about earlier is what happens the moment that you find out you have a ransomware attack. Do you have phone numbers of the people? Do you have Stephen Legg's phone number on you? Do you know who to contact at Antigen? Do you know who your insurance company is? It's most likely is going to be on a holiday-based event, or it's going to be at an opportune time for the criminals at a very inconvenient time for the business. And
Hmm.
so to stay on the question, where is this going? I think there's a lot more internal continuity planning. There's going to be a lot more internal processes and awarenesses that businesses are going to have to do regardless of the insurance placement. And they're going to have other solutions such as Titan Defense Complete already in place to give them a fighting chance to avoid and respond better if an event happens. And the insurance, again, is probably going to be around, and it's really secondary. It's already secondary now, but it's continuing to be in the background. Like, okay, the dust is cleared. Similar like a house fire, right? You have homeowners insurance, but it's never involved until the fire's out. and you start assessing everything and they're doing an inspection, I think that's where cyber insurance is ultimately going to go. You're going to need an Antigen. You're going to need an MSP involved. You're going to need internal people at the business to respond and make the decisions that need to be made. And then you bring the insurance company in later. Okay, let's kind of sort through this rubble and get some reimbursements or money paid out and move on.
Well, I love the fire analogy. The old mindset is really as hilarious as it sounds. It's really like companies, even there's not so many today. I feel like the cyber landscape has fortunately or unfortunately kind of forced people down that road, to understand that there is an impact to this stuff, and it can and will affect you at some point. But it'd be like going, rather than buying fire suppressors and smoke alarms and fire mitigation controls, just going and buying fire insurance, and then expecting that if there's a fire, well, we'll get paid. It's fine.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to happen.
You still lost your house and everything in it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's that impact, and people often don't think about the kind of everything in between. They're just looking at the money, the dollars.
And to your point on that, people that you buy fire insurance on a house, you pay one premium. So this is talking about earlier about where's the market going, what do you need to have in place, and I keep talking about price because that's where I get a lot of scrutiny in my professional career is how much does stuff cost, Brian? And the people that have a house with no protections pay one amount for their house insurance, but those that have smoke alarms, smoke detectors, maybe they have a central alarm tied. It's a heat sensing alarm that's tied to some third-party monitoring company. They're going to pay a better rate than those that just buy fire insurance. So it's the same analogy to cyber insurance is people that have a product like yours in place are going to pay less than ones that don't.
Well, and the way we've structured it on our end, just to shine some light on it, is that we Antigen, what makes us different from a lot of providers that are out there, and the reason that insurance carriers choose to partner with us, is that we specifically look to focus only on the controls that make the greatest material impact to your risk, and offer the most complete protection for all the key kind of risk levers that we see make a difference in actual breaches. So if an attacker were really to come to your back door and try to get in, if let's say they do get in, we're looking to set the stage so that they have an extremely difficult time to move forward, so that we catch them early in the attack, and we can even minimize or eliminate the need to even make an insurance claim in an ideal situation, if I'm honest. Not that you shouldn't have insurance, you absolutely should, just like you should with fire insurance. But to your point, that's why you need that's why you want those kind of best of breed controls in place to really drive the overall cost of your security, and or kind of risk mitigation strategy, when if we're using the fire analogy, drive the cost of that stuff down, and drive the impact and cost of any event down as well.
Right. You're basically the fire extinguisher. So therefore, like if there's a small kitchen fire and that's what you've stopped by allowing that,
Yep.
you don't have to make that major claim if you don't need to. And
Yep.
it's you made a very important point. You can help a business identify. This is where in the insurance brokerage side and in risk consulting, this is where we struggle in that technical piece. Is where are the best levers to pull on? Where are the most important prominent areas at the moment? That's going to change to focus on to best protect and mitigate risk and mitigate an event. If there is an event, the impact of it, and that's where firms like you can really offer the most value to the business, because we might fall short there. We might help make sure that there's a comprehensive contract in place and there's a lot of money there for a lot of events. But what is the best thing to focus on? They're going to need to turn to professionals like you. The early years, not too long ago, at 2018, so that's 4 years ago of this recording, there was a couple of insurance companies that require that you shred confidential paper documentation. I struggle to see the value in pulling that lever in today's environment. Although there's an impact of it, there are so many other things. That's pretty time intensive. There's an expense to that. You're going to have to align resources behind doing that versus there are probably 15 things that you think are more important to talk about the overall scheme of cyber attacks and the impact to a business.
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, irrespective of any individual products, on the security side, it's evolved. You kind of called out MFA backups and a few other things earlier in the conversation. EDR, MDR, I think, because those are rising kind of in those realms. But just to kind of lay out there what those controls look like for kind of lower risk or smaller businesses, you're really looking at things like EDR, MDR, MFA, segmentation technologies, as well as things like API-based email security, and those the combination of those things establishes both external and kind of internal resilience and awareness, as well as the ability to detect and respond to activity that makes it through any one of those controls. Because anybody that sells you security products, and this is one of my big complaints about the security market and tooling market in general, you get these kind of pay for play marketing engines going and throw a million buzzwords in, and it's the silver bullet for the breach of the day and this and that, and everybody tells a great story, and it has flashy slides, cool videos, cool content, sweet demos. I love the portals and reports and dashboards. Everybody likes shiny things, but like at the end of the day, all that stuff does is serve to confuse how effective some of those controls are. And to your point about the analogy you made with the fire controls, just kind of simple controls versus something that's managed, that's really kind of the key differentiator between a lot of kind of the best controls, especially at the enterprise level, and what's previously made them kind of inaccessible. That's a challenge that we seek to solve, regardless of what product it is that we're working with. We try to take those enterprise controls and make them not only cost viable for businesses of all sizes, but manageable and available and implementable in a way that's not going to turn them over or destroy their budgets. And I think that's kind of a key point for the security industry in general, that we all kind of have to continue to work on, quarter over quarter, year over year, because if we don't get it, and if we don't work arm in arm with our insurance partners, like yourself, to your point about understanding what the controls of the day are, and kind of based on the threat landscape, how that all looks and comes together, and what levers they need to pull. It's just a really challenging thing to solve without that community approach. And that I think is one of the reasons we love working with you so much, is that you always kind of take this approach with your customers and with your policyholders. So one of the questions that I had kind of coming out of that whole conversation was, what are some, from your perspective, some like actionable steps that folks could implement, tomorrow, or conversations they could have internal in their organizations to start kind of raising awareness, having the conversation at that executive level, and starting to really kind of deeply consider these things, and how they can best put together a strategy to mitigate a lot of the challenges that we've kind of talked about today.
Great question. I think it's the question of the day, every day, right? and you talked, some of the tools that you suggested are really are the basics, and they need to lean on professionals like you to do the technical basics that they need to do. The technical hygiene, you mentioned that word earlier. These are the basics to having a robust fighting chance of avoiding these issues. The piece that we recommend is more on the behavioral based side. Awareness is a word you use. It's about awareness, and it's about different procedures that they can implement in addition to the technical side, to watch out for the phishing emails and the links, to be overzealous about that, to have require phone calls and an extra set of eyes on money transfers to ensure that there's a second look, to have other types of controls where it's not just one individual in charge of all of the money or all of the IT, that there are some dual controls that can help complement and protect the organization. So it's awareness on the behaviors that could lead to these type of events happening. Email is the number one area. We're seeing more and more in the texting realm come through there, and links through there. So we're seeing a little bit of evolution there, but the internal controls on that gives you the best chance, complemented with the technical. You can have the best awareness and behavior-based tools, but if you don't have the items that you discussed earlier with MFA, the API email system, some of the other. Yeah, I'm sure there's the firewalls and other security protocols you recommend. Those two things need to zipper together, just like a crime insurance policy and cyber insurance policy need to zipper together.
100%. It's really about understanding the full circumference of risk for your organization, and making sure you have reasonable, um, one, that you've budgeted to address everything, but two, that you have reasonable measures in place to cover all of those things. To your point, you wouldn't buy the nicest fire extinguishers and neglect to have fire suppression systems, or a detection system to activate the fire suppression systems,
Right.
as an example.
Right.
So I love it. So, Brian, I guess before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts? Anything else you want to kind of add, or any questions you had for me?
I think this Titan Defense Complete and the opportunity for policyholders to save money on that. But again, as we wrapped here at the end, it really is built-in controls, and it gives you this infrastructure to survive an event or mitigate an event. I think that's the most important piece people should continue to look at, because a lot of companies have internal IT and enterprise solutions, and they're not intended to be the best they can be, but outside professionals, as part of that balance, they need to make sure that that's going on. So, a final thought is just like people have second opinions and assessments on a variety of physical items. And I really suggest that businesses have outside firms do an assessment, especially if an in-house, IT, of the infrastructure, of the vulnerability testing, maybe even a mock strategy or a mock cyber event on what strategies you're going to implement if this were to happen. So I just think that's great. I'll use your word again, as hygiene. I really think that's a great way to keep the systems clean, and also be better prepared in case something happens.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think cyber threat simulation exercises, tabletop exercises, are a critically important thing, because you're not going to have an event every year, and hopefully, if you're doing everything right, any events you do have will be greatly minimized and dealt with. But in years that you don't, if you have those assessments, you have those tabletop exercises, you kind of keep it an ongoing conversation rather than something that you're firing and forgetting one time, because the attackers, the threat landscape is not going to fire and forget. It's always going to keep moving forward. It's a, I don't like using war analogies, but it's kind of a virtual arms race of sorts. We as defenders are always trying to keep up and make sure that we're addressing the new techniques, tactics and protocols that attackers are using. And it's over the years, it's gone from phishing and kind of traditional compromises to now folks like Qbot and Squirrel Waffle using AI based phishing campaigns that are hitting 10,000 accounts with AI generated phishing emails that look super authentic, and are actually based on data collected in 5 to 30 minutes from some of those inboxes that they just suck up into their data center and operationalize in that way. So there's just so much out there to keep up with. To your point, having trusted third parties, like Brian, on the insurance side, and having security experts on your side is really a great way to put your best foot forward today and every year, in terms of addressing this problem.
We got to keep fighting the fight. If we don't get the point is, don't give up. I mean, there's going to be there's going to be challenges we're all going to be faced, and we'll get through it. There's a whole industry, and you're in it, that helps support businesses when they go through these things. Insurance companies will come in; they have an infrastructure to help support it as well. But don't let your guard down. But we'll get through it.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Well, Brian, thank you for joining me. Any final thoughts before we wrap up here? I know we kind of stepped through a lot today. I really always appreciate your input.
And same to you. No, I again, I couldn't thank you more for the opportunity, and just I really enjoyed talking with you, and what you guys are doing is a much needed in the marketplace in a variety of ways.
Thank you very much. That's high praise coming from you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap up then. Thank everybody for joining us.